Let's turn our attention to the determinants of demand, and this is probably one of the biggest sections that we're going to have within this particular chapter. We're interested in seeing exactly how our market demand curve is going to shift over to the right, away from the origin, or over to the left towards the origin with these determinants. And there are a few things that we want to focus in on before we actually go ahead into the meat of the topic. Number one, as you can see right here, it's highlighted. These are non-price factors. They are held constant for drawing a demand curve, and they include these particular things. So here, key feature number one, non-price factors. None of these determinants that you see right here have anything to do with the current price of the good. Because they have nothing to do with the current price of the good, that tells us that we are actually going to be shifting our entire demand curve in a particular direction. There are major differences between non-price factors and a price factor, which we'll get into in the next section. So here, anything that you see right here has nothing to do with the current price of the good. Number two, these determinants that you see right here, these are the only things that are going to be affecting demand. Taste and preferences, income, prices of related products or other goods, number of buyers, and expectations about future prices. You might think that there are other determinants that are going to be affecting your demand, such as taxes, but if we do not bring it up within this particular section, they are not going to be affecting demand. So here, these are the only things that are going to affect demand. Finally, number three, you want to go ahead and get the practice drawing out these shifts and these demand curves because it's going to be a little bit easier once we introduce supply and combine both of these curves together to see what happens with our equilibrium. Economics is a subject where the more practice that you get drawing these graphs, the better it's going to be for you. So you do want to go ahead, get a lot of practice, get a lot of exposure in drawing everything out. So there is a little bit of intuition that we need to build up with each of these determinants. So let's go ahead and see exactly how these determinants are going to be affecting our market demand curve. First, we'll start off with taste and preferences. So tastes and preferences. Preferences. So taste and preferences, they just basically refer to, is this good or service? Is it becoming a little bit more popular? Is it going to be a little bit more famous? Do people want more of this good? That type of idea. So is it more fashionable? That type of thing. So with taste and preferences, anytime we want to build up a demand curve, we just want to go ahead and take our Cartesian plane right here, and we have a simple downward sloping demand curve, D0. So D0 in this instance tells us that this is our initial demand curve. This is where we're going to be starting off. On the vertical axis, we have price. We can just shorthand it with P. And on the horizontal axis, we have quantity, which is Q. So here, a simple demand curve. And we want to go ahead and see how our demand curve is going to shift once we introduce this particular shock right here. So let's go ahead and introduce a specific good for our market. So it's pretty conventional or traditional for us to go ahead and label the market that we're taking a look at just to make sure that we understand what we're focusing in on. And let's suppose that we focus in on the market for Croc shoes. So for some strange reason, we're looking at the market for these very, very ugly shoes. So hopefully you aren't wearing any of them right now, but here we're looking at the market for Croc shoes. And let's suppose that there's a positive shock to taste and preferences. So if this is the shock that we're going to be introducing. Positive shock to tastes / preferences. Preferences. So this just tells us that maybe Croc shoes are seen as a little bit more fashionable. We can say that as a sort of specific shock right here. So Croc shoes are seen as more fashionable. Probably never going to happen because, once again, these shoes are really ugly. But let's suppose that Kanye West starts wearing them and people follow whatever Kanye does, so these shoes become more fashionable. What do you think this is going to do for our demand curve in this instance? Our demand curve is going to shift over to the right, indicating that we have an increase in demand. So anytime we have an increase in demand, we're going to shift it over to the right or away from the origin. So we go from D0 and end up on an entirely new demand curve, D1 in this instance. Whenever we shift demand curves, we don't want to say up or down because that can lead to some confusing elements when we bring in supply. So we always want to say away from the origin to the right or toward the origin over to the left. And in this instance, we do notice that we do end up on an entirely new demand curve because there's a positive shock to our taste and preferences. So with all of this, we notice that at a price of P0, it just tells us that our quantity demanded is going to be much higher. We end up on a entirely new demand curve. We at a price of P0, we end up at a quantity of Q0 before, and now a quantity of Q1 in this instance. So this tells us that consumers are willing and able to purchase more at every single price. Consumers are willing and able to purchase more at all prices. Purchase more at all prices. So here with an increase or a positive shock to taste and preferences, that's going to increase our demand curve, shift it over to the right, and we end up on D1 now. So also something that I should note in this sort of particular section is that I'm only going to be doing these shifts in one particular direction just for brevity of time to keep these videos relatively short. So if you wanted to go ahead and say what happens in the opposite case, what happens if there's a negative shock to your taste and preferences, Croc shoes are seen as more ugly than they are right now, that's going to shift our demand curve over to the left towards the origin. We go from D1 over down to D0 in this particular example, and consumers are less willing and less able to purchase more at all prices. Essentially, they're going to be purchasing less at every single price. So here, just to get that extra practice, go ahead and do the opposite shocks for all of the things that we're going to be introducing here, just so you get that practice. So if you understand, go ahead and take a look at our next determinant, which is going to be income. And under income, there are two different types of goods that we can take a look at. Here, under income, we take a look at normal goods versus inferior goods. First, let's introduce normal goods. With normal goods, these are most of the goods that we purchase on an everyday basis. It just tells us that when we increase our income, that tells us that we probably are going to purchase more of this particular good or service. So a good for which an increase in income, results in rising demand. Results in rising demand. So normal goods, a good for which an increase in income results in rising demand. So increase in income, rising demand. And once again, let's go ahead and build up our demand curves. We have D0, we have price, we have quantity. And what do you think is a good that would be considered a normal good? Probably something like electronics, right? Electronics. So when income increases, this is the general shock that we're going to introduce. Income increases. When your income increases and we're taking a look at a normal good, how do you think demand is going to react? Demand is going to shift over to the right, telling us that, hey, we have higher demand for these normal goods. And just the opposite, of course, if income actually decreases on normal goods, we're going to have less demand. On the other hand, we also have another good that we can take a look at, which are known as inferior goods. Inferior goods. So if it's not normal, it can be considered to be inferior. And this is just going to be the opposite. It tells us that when we increase income, we actually want less of this good. So a good for which an increase in income, results in declining demand. Results in declining demand. So here, increase in income, you have less demand, declining demand. And what type of goods do you think would be considered to be inferior goods? We can say ramen, cheap food, motels, public transportation, maybe tickets for a really bad sports team like the Marlins. They're pretty terrible. So here, let's go ahead and see what our demand curve for the market is going to look like. We have price, we have quantity, and let's go ahead and use a cheap food example, cheap food. So basically, your income increases, you say, I don't want this good anymore, I'm better than this good, so therefore it is going to shift the demand curve over to the left towards the origin. So once again, the general shock that we're going to introduce is income increases. So when income increases, our demand curve is going to shift over to the left towards the origin in this instance. So here you do definitely want to differentiate between normal goods and inferior goods because we introduce the same shock, but it's shifting our demand curve in opposite directions. So far, so good. Let's go ahead and go to our third determinant, which are going to be prices of related goods. Prices of related goods. And once again, we're going to have two different types of goods we can take a look at under the prices of related goods. And notice here, this is still going to be a non-price determinant for us because we're actually changing the price of the other good. We're not changing the price of the good that we're focusing in on. So we're not going to be focusing in on the changing the price of the good that we make on the bottom of this graph right here. So let's go ahead and take a look at first at the substitute goods. Substitute goods. And like the name implies, substitute goods are just goods that can be used in place of one another. Goods that can be used in place. So goods that can be used in place of another. And what are a few examples of substitute goods? You can say, hey, why not Pepsi and Coke? Pepsi/Coke. You can say maybe why not Apple and Samsung? Apple, Samsung. What else can we say? We maybe put coffee and tea. Coffee, tea. These are all examples of substitute goods. Basically, we have no sort of, we really can't tell the difference between these, or we really don't care which one we have because these are substitute goods. We can use them in place of one another. So goods that can be used in place of one another. I should put a one right there, and one another. And let's go ahead and use this Pepsi/Coke example to build up our demand curve. We have price, the quantity, start off with D0 here. And once again, we're taking a look at the Coke market. The soda, not the drug. And once again, let's go ahead and see what happens when we change the price on the substitute good. So what happens, do you think, if the price of Pepsi increases? In this instance, this is the specific shock to this example, but in general, we can say that the price of a substitute increases. So price of substitute increases. So price of a substitute good increases. So when the price of Pepsi increases, do you want more Coke or do you want less Coke? You only care about the relative prices in this instance. So because the price of Pepsi has gotten relatively more expensive, you say, hey, Coke is a substitute product, so I want more Coke. So demand for Coke is going to increase. And once again, it is a non-price determinant. We changed the price of Pepsi. We didn't change the price of Coke. So do be aware of that. So when the price of a substitute is going to increase, you want more of the good that we're taking a look at. You only care about relative prices in this instance. And if something's not a substitute good, then we can go ahead and consider it to be a complement good, which is the second component for these related goods. Next, take a look at the complement good. With the complement good, instead of them being used in place of one another, these are goods that are going to be consumed with one another. So goods that are typically consumed, with one another. So goods that are typically consumed with one another. If you only have one of these goods and not the other, then it's essentially seen as worthless to you. So what do you think would be a few examples of complement goods? How about car and gasoline? So in order for your car to run, you need gasoline. These are seen as complement goods with one another. How about phones and chargers? So phones, chargers, if you don't have a charger, you can't use your phone. So once again, these are complement goods. And the classic example of hamburgers and buns. Hamburger/buns. So always food items are pretty good. So here, if you don't have a bun, your hamburger is seen as pretty useless in this instance. So here, complement goods, you need both of these goods in order to derive any type of utility or satisfaction from it. Let's go ahead and see what happens to our demand curve right here. So D0, quantity, and let's go ahead and use this bun and hamburger example. So we're taking a look at the market for hamburgers. And we want to see what happens to the demand for hamburgers when the price of buns increases. Price of buns increases. So once again, this is a specific example to this particular market right here. In general, we can say if the price of a complement increases. Price of complement increases. So if the price of buns increases, do you want more hamburgers or do you want fewer hamburgers? Well, because these are seen as complement goods, if the price of buns increases, you don't want as many hamburgers as before, so your demand for hamburgers is going to go down. So this is going to be D1 in this instance. We end up on an entirely new demand curve. So here, anytime the price of a complement good is going to increase, your demand for the other good is going to decrease. On the other hand, remember, if we had the substitute good, if the price of a substitute increases, you're going to have an increase in demand for the substitute good. So do be aware, once again, substitute goods and complement goods, they do move in opposite directions. Here, with substitute goods, prices increase, demand is going to shift over to the right. If prices go down or decrease, demand is going to shift over to the left. And with complement goods, just the opposite case. If the price of a complement increases, demand decreases. But if the price of a complement goes down, then the demand is going to increase instead. Go ahead, once again, differentiate the sort of things between these two. Do a compare and contrast. Next, we can go ahead and take a look at the number of buyers, and this one's the most trivial out of all of them. It's the most trivial, so I'm not going to even go ahead and draw a graph out for this. We take a look at the number of buyers. Number of buyers. So in terms of the number of buyers, if we have an increase in the number of buyers or an increase in population, what do you think is going to happen to demand? Obviously, if we have more buyers, we have more people, we have more population, there's going to be more demand. So demand, more demand, or it increases. So it shifts our demand curve over to the right. Nothing very in-depth about that. We have more people, there has to be more demand, so demand increases. Finally, we go ahead and take a look at the last determinant, which are expectations. So expectations about a few different things. Expectations about future prices, about future incomes, and future product availability. So running out of space there. So expectations about future prices, future incomes, and future product availability. And once again, the key operating word here is future. We're changing future prices, future incomes, and future product availability, and not necessarily current prices. So let's go ahead and hit this idea of future prices first. And we want to go ahead and see what happens to our demand, D0 right here, when we go ahead and have price and quantity. And what example do I have here? I have Victoria's Secret. So VS right here, Victoria's Secret. Suppose that you know Victoria's Secret is going to be holding a sale next week. So Victoria's Secret is holding a sale next week. So they have a biannual sale. If you don't know what Victoria's Secret is, just go ahead and change this over to Steam. They have the same thing. So a biannual sale, twice a year, they hold a sale. So if you know for sure that Victoria's Secret is going to be holding a sale, are you going to go ahead and go to Victoria's Secret right now to buy their clothing and lingerie, or are you going to go ahead and wait? Well, if you know they're going to have a sale next week, you're just going to go ahead and wait right now. So you're not going to go to the store right now to buy this particular product. You're going to wait until the prices become lower. So what happens to the current demand for Victoria's Secret? The current demand is going to go and decrease. So that's a pretty ugly demand curve. Let me redraw that one. So here, our demand curve is going to decrease from D0 to D1 because you're going to go ahead and wait. So anytime we draw out one of these demand curves, it's going to be for this particular moment in time. You know for sure that they're going to hold a sale. You know that prices are going to be lower. So therefore, you wait off. You don't buy their clothing right now. So your demand for their clothing does go down. So this is the specific shock. Once again, this is the general one. Expectations that future prices will decrease. That future prices will decrease. So here, anytime you expect future prices to decrease, that means your demand is also going to decrease as well. And then we can hit the sort of next two futures into one graph. So future incomes and future product availability. So suppose that you know that your future income is going to increase. No future income increases. So you know your future incomes increase or product will be in shortage. Or product will be in shortage. And once again, we'll just go ahead and do a general example with this zone. We just have price, we have quantity, and we have D0 right here. So suppose now that you know your income is going to increase in the future. What are you going to go ahead and do right now? You're going to go ahead and spend like you already have the money. You're going to go ahead and make it rain. You're going to try to purchase as much as you want. You've won the lottery. You know your income's going to increase. So you're going to start spending crazy right now. So in that end, demand for any good or service that we take a look at, that's going to increase. Along the same vein, if you know the product is going to be in shortage, what are you going to do right now? So suppose that there is a shortage of toilet paper, a shortage of hand sanitizer, or anything along those lines. What are you going to go ahead and do right now? You're going to go to the marketplace and buy as much as you can, so demand is going to increase. If you know something is going to be in shortage later on next week, you're going to go ahead right now, go to the marketplace, go to the grocery store and say, hey, give me this item, which causes an increase in demand. So with all of these determinants of demand, this is exactly the intuition that you're going to be building up within this particular section. We only did these sort of shifts in one particular direction, but I would highly encourage you to see exactly what happens in the opposite case as well. It happens a lot in economics. What you do to one side, you can easily see what happens if you do it to the opposite case as well. So in this section, we tackled all these determinants right here. We tackled taste and preferences. We tackled normal goods, inferior goods. So what happens to each of these goods when your income changes? We take a look at the prices of related goods, the substitutes and complements. We also took a look at the number of buyers, which is the most trivial one. And then finally, the expectations about future prices, a goods availability, and your own income. So go ahead, get a lot of practice with these determinants of demand. We'll have to do the same thing in terms of supply. Draw these graphs out, get a lot of practice by taking a look at the practice problems, and then we'll go ahead and try to wrap up our demand section in the next videos.